We are approaching the beta period for Thrawn's Revenge 3.2, so it's finally time to show off one of the bigger parts of the update that we've not been able to cover particularly extensively so far, the Hapes Consortium. A few weeks ago, we covered how their government mechanics will work in another video, but today we're finally going to be breaking down the faction's space roster, their space stations, and the general playstyle for the faction. If you're unfamiliar with the Hapans from the mod or the expanded universe, they're a somewhat isolationist matriarchal society which plays a pretty prominent role as allies of the New Republic. We only ever get 2 ship designs for them, 3 counting their mobile palace, though we do get 2 more ships named and never designed. Because of this, we had a lot of ground to cover in fleshing out the faction ourselves, so most of the designs you'll see here today were made by Valerie and Aseritzel to fit those gaps. To get us started, we'll talk about the 2 ships you may know from lore, the Battledragon and the Nova Cruiser. The Battledragon is essentially the backbone of the Hapan fleet. It has good damage, durability, and a reasonable fighter complement as well. While their weapons are primarily organized into 2 main firing points, they have the ability to switch their firing style, splitting that up into extra arcs at the expense of some accuracy. In the future, there will also be 3 versions of the Battledragon that you upgrade through, reflecting some technological advances the Battledragon saw over the period of the mod in-universe. Second, we have the Nova Cruiser, which also comes in 2 versions, a standard carrier version with a lighter hull and lighter weaponry, more oriented towards short-range engagement with the corvettes, as well as a more combat-oriented refit with medium turbo lasers instead of light, and trading some of the fighter complements for extra shield generation power and hull plating. We wanted to make sure that while we were creating other ships, we kept these 2, the Battledragon and the Nova Cruiser, as the 2 primary members of the fleet. So while both are quite flexible, other ships we've designed around them to fill more specific or niche roles. Having their roots in piracy, the Hapans also had a tendency to steal ships to fill out their fleets, showing up with a bunch of stolen ISDs to give to Leia and the New Republic. So we've also given the Hapans a boarding shuttle. As a faction that did a lot of boarding and needed more niche support things, it makes sense to have a lot of ion weaponry aimed at disabling those ships. So next we'll move on to 2 ships built to fill that role, the Beta Cruiser and the Pulsar. The Beta is one of the 2 ships mentioned in lore with no design, so along with the design here by Valerie, we've given it some ultra-heavy ion cannons, allowing it to tear up the shields of capitals from a safe distance. It does have additional ion cannons, concussion missiles, and a light turbo laser, allowing it to engage at a shorter range as well once things get less dangerous. The Pulsar, on the other hand, is one of the larger ships for the Hapans, and while it has slightly shorter range ion cannons, being just the heavy grade instead of ultra heavy, it can take a lot more of a beating. Going back to the smallest end of their ships, the Hapan anti-fighter ship for this version is the Bidom. This is actually an area where we already have another ship nearly ready for future versions, but for point 2 we're just sticking with the Bidom. Also at the shorter end, we have the Olanji and Cheruba. Both have some proton torpedoes, and the Olanji is a bit more fragile with lighter weaponry, with both being somewhat geared towards taking out smaller targets in support of Battledragons, which the Cheruba's speed is especially helpful for. Finally, on the small end we have the Stella. This light carrier is the second ship that was named in lore with no design. It has a few heavy turbo lasers to help hit targets from a distance, but it is primarily there for its fighters and a bit less flexible than the Nova. With so many small ships falling below the cutoff point for targetable hardpoints, and with longer construction time on their ships requiring being more careful with positioning and target selection, the Coronal fleet tender is a very important element of any Hapan fleet, which, along with the Hapan House Command Battledragons, which we covered in the government overview, are where you're going to be getting your interdiction mines, much like in Fall of the Republic with the fleet tenders there, rather than having them be on a separate dedicated ship like other factions in Thrawn Revenge with their interdictors. This is also one of the more clear examples of Valerie's referencing of avian or sea life for Hapan ship designs, based on the Battledragon and Nova looking like a clamshell and a bird respectively. Next up we'll get to some of the larger ships in the Hapan Navy, though that's still comparatively quite small. The Magnetar, the Terrafon, and the Neutron. The Magnetar is largely a source of alpha munition damage, as it's both a carrier, so it's going to be putting out bombers, and is also the source of assault concussion missile launchers for the Hapans. This is going to make them quite good at assaulting large battle cruisers. The Terrafon backs up some medium turbo lasers and ion cannons with a good amount of proton torpedoes, though it's primarily one of the 2 ships that wants to brawl with other capitals for the Hapans. The second of those ships is the far more defensively oriented Neutron. The Neutron, as the larger of the 2, comes in at nearly 6,000 health and shields. It doesn't have quite as much damage output itself, so it mostly wants to come in and take off the heat from other ships as they put in the damage. The Hapans as a whole want to maintain their battle lines, allowing their battle dragons to put out as much damage as possible while staying safe, rather than wanting to get up and messy with the other factions. Generally, the Hapans are at their best when they're able to maintain their lines, and if stuff gets too close to them and starts breaking up their formation, they're going to have more of a problem. The Neutron can basically act as a wall in some of those larger engagements and help keep everything directed. Next, among the standard ships is the Ancient Mist Carrier. This is their largest standard buildable ship at 1200 meters. That puts it nearly 300 meters longer than the Neutron, but still 400 meters shorter than Imperial Star Destroyers. Despite its large size, it doesn't have that much direct combat power itself, putting more of its power out through its fighters and bombers. You'll generally want to keep it back a bit to keep up your supply of fighters and bombers throughout a battle. In a pinch though, it can help tank, having similar hull and shields to the much smaller Neutron, but it's far less of a direct threat than the Neutron in that role. This is actually one of the ships which I would like to redo the texture for in a short term, so it's actually something that might look a little bit different by the time you have it. Finally, we have a unique hero ship, the Star Home, which is basically a mobile Hapan palace. While lightly armed, the Star Home was not meant to engage in battle, at least in modern times. But Empire at War being what it is, we wanted to make sure people had some reason to actually use it. As a result, we've given it some fleet tender capabilities on top of its light armament, helping to reinforce some of the intended gameplay of the faction, and it's another ship where Aceratul has actually done a new model for it. This is the old model we've had for a long time by the Farseer. We just haven't had a chance to do the new texture for the new model. That'll probably have to wait for 0.3. That's going to do it for their initial roster of ships. On the fighter side, we also have some of their basic fighters done, the Mytil Fighter and Bomber, and they'll probably have the Mytil Interceptor by the time release comes around, but compared to some other factions, they're not meant to be especially fighter-centric. We do have some other ships and fighters already underway for future builds for the Hapans, but for now, we'll move to their initial station set in 0.2 as well. Like the other factions, the Hapans have 5 primary starbase levels. Ignore the texture on the level 5, it's just a stand-in from an old ship while I make the new ones. Hapans are meant to be a faction which builds up defensively and then chooses their moment to attack and build up again once they've taken the new planet. So where their ships build more slowly, their stations build more quickly and are usually fairly powerful. The fact that they only have one shipyard level, which we covered in their government mechanics video, means that while they never quite reach the same size of garrison on their shipyards as the Dreadnought shipyards for other factions, they do have pretty good baseline size for all their shipyard garrisons wherever they put a shipyard. The Hapan stations generally edge out the comparative levels for other factions by a little bit, especially at the lowest levels. The first 4 levels are called the Meridian 1 through 4, and then the 5th with the placeholder texture is called the Aphelion. This makes them the first faction in both of the Empire War Expanded mods that doesn't use Golans at all, and instead uses entirely unique station sets, though their custom tradeport model is not quite textured yet either, and probably won't be for the 0.2 version. Much like with the ships, we do have a few ideas for where we want to expand their stations in future builds as well, so there's going to be more to look forward to there as well. That's going to do it for our look at the Hapan space roster and stations. I'm not sure if we'll be able to do a dedicated ground roster overview for 0.2, but there will be a preview playthrough starting here, showing off all of these space elements, as well as their unique units on ground within the next couple of weeks. The faction has been in the works for years now, and while it hasn't always been the easiest, a lot of people have put in a ton of work, particularly Valerie and Aceratul, and I think the results have been a fun and unique take on an Empire at War faction, so I hope you're looking forward to getting your hands on them, and I hope you enjoy them when you do. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.